Well, good morning. It's great to be with you all this morning. Stephen, thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate that. I got in last night from Washington, D.C. You know our nation's capital. That's where people walk down Lover's Lane holding their own hands. And where you find folks lost in thought because it's such unfamiliar territory. He couldn't resist, just had to do that. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you all for what you do. You know, your military goes to work every day having sworn an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States, and most service members don't think about the fact that they're serving the Constitution, protecting the Constitution every day. They think about it sometimes. But like you, they don't think about really what they're doing and how they're affecting the country. But what do? The capital projects that you all influence, if you did not do what you're doing, if you were prevented from doing it, if somehow you all stopped doing what you're doing, a large chunk of this country would grind to a halt. So just as a fellow citizen, I'd like to thank you all for what you do, and I hope you take some time every once in a while just to consider the enormity of what you do and how much you impact your fellow citizens. I've been asked to talk to you about a couple of things. One, a little bit about a day in the life of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Two, a little bit about National Security Council decision-making and any lessons that might be applicable to us here in the room. Three, a little bit about what, if anything, keeps me awake at night. And then lastly, and the biggest chunk of time, on leadership. And then save some time for questions. So I better get started. For me, the day in the life of the chairman was a great honor. I get up about 4:30, do a little bit of physical training, run, walk, push-ups, sit-ups, those kinds of things. About 6:15, the car would come pick me up, and in the back of the car would be some intelligence things to be read. Take about 15 minutes to get down to the office at the Pentagon. When I got there around 6:30, my CIA briefer would be there. He or she would then brief me on things that were too sensitive to put on paper and leave in the back of my car. So by about 7 a.m., I was totally depressed. At about 7 o'clock, I'd have a stand-up meeting across the way from my office with my principal staff. Stand up because if you sit down, people get comfortable, they have to think of things to say. If it's stand up, only those people who have something to say actually say it. But there's always somebody 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, someplace on the planet doing something stupid. And you need to know what that is if you're the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and whether or not there's anything you should be doing about it militarily. If it was Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, then we would go to the White House. The Secretary of Defense and I would get in the car, drive to the White House for a National Security Council meeting. And those meetings would last an hour to an hour and a half. And if it was a Wednesday, immediately after the National Security Council meeting, we would go into the Oval Office on what was called one-on-one. And the one-on-one was the president asking the chairman questions that he didn't want to ask in front of other people for whatever reason, and the chance for the chairman to tell the president things that he wanted to tell him in a slightly smaller venue. Now, it was called one-on-one, but the people there were the president, the vice president, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor, Chief of Staff of the White House. So it wasn't exactly one-on-one. But it was an opportunity for me to tell the president the answers to his questions from before and to tell him things that I needed to tell him. I worked with President Bush. He was very, very smart. And I had to learn how to slow things down, because the faster I answered one of his questions, the faster he had the next question. It wasn't a game. He was just a very busy man, and he needed to know things. The hardest thing for me to do was to remind myself, do not tell the President of the United States something you do not know. Now, that sounds pretty simple, but when you're an advisor, and you're supposed to be the senior military advisor to the president, when the president asks you a question, you want to be able to say whatever it is he wants to hear. Not what he wants to hear, but the topic he wants to hear about. The first time I did that, at about question number 3, I didn't know the answer. So I looked him in the eye and I said, Mr. President, I don't have a clue, but I'll find out. And his whole body just kind of relaxed, and you could see, and he's told me this many times in the years since then, that he knew that I was always going to tell him what I knew, what I didn't know, what I was extrapolating from things I did know, etc. I was going to make sure he knew what I was telling him and how solid the information was. When we get done at the White House, then we go back to the Pentagon, get back around 10 or 11 o'clock, and then both Secretary Gates and Secretary Rumsfeld very much wanted to make sure that all 4 of the senior leaders in the building did everything together all the time. And this isn't about camaraderie, it was about we were going to be in front of press conferences, we were going to be going to other meetings, we all had to be on the same sheet of music. So the Secretary of Defense and the DepSecDef and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Vice Chairman were in meetings together all day long, starting at about 10 or 11 and going till about 6 p.m. And they would just run the gamut of things about the war, things about budget, things about nuclear weapons, you name it. We all had to be on the same sheet of music. Around 6 o'clock, I'd finally get back to my own office, do my inbox, and I would do the stuff in my inbox that was too classified to take home. And then I put the rest in a book bag, go home, have dinner with my wife, and then do the work after dinner, go to bed about 10 p.m., get up the next morning and do it all again. It sounds onerous. It wasn't. It was absolutely an honor to do. One of the things that was part of that process was the National Security Council itself. And our National Security Council functions extremely well one way and poorly in another. It functions extremely well when the president asks a question. What are my opportunities as president to influence whatever this issue is? Come to me with courses of action, things I might do. And when the president asks a question, all of the agencies, State Department, Treasury, Homeland Security, you name it, go to work on the problem and are extremely collaborative with each other about how we might solve that problem. There are meetings, to use military terms, there are meetings at the 1-star level, then at the 2-star level, then at the 3-star level, then at the 4-star level, which is basically the National Security Council with the president. So in working our way up to present to the president, a lot of good cooperation. Present to the president, normally he has a few more questions, you go back and do a few more push-ups to get the right answers to the right questions. Eventually, the president makes a decision and says, this is what I want you to do. All the way up until a point where the president makes a decision, the system works extremely well. The instant the president makes the decision is when the system starts to break down. Because really good Americans who are the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Treasury, etc., go back to their departments with their piece of the problem, and they start executing what they believe to be the proper way to do it. The problem is that below the President of the United States, there's nobody in our government in this process who has the authority to direct traffic, to tell state to do this, to tell defense to do that, to say you go and do these things this way, to somebody in charge to make a decision. So what happens is, perhaps you have a strong Secretary of State and a strong Secretary of Defense, and they see things differently because they have different responsibilities. And then, unless it is so important as to go tell the president that they can't agree, it just sort of festers. And I can give you example after example in my 6 years of being part of that process of where the nation was poorly served because good Americans working inside of a system that had no leader were not doing as good as they should. I'll save you my explanation of how we might fix that because there's another 45-minute presentation, but bottom line is, and the message to all of us is very simple. Whether you are in a company with 10 people or you're trying to run a country with 300 million plus people, when you have a project, no matter how small or how big, if you don't have somebody in charge who's known and seen as the designated leader, who has the authority to make decisions and make things happen, that project is not going to happen the way you want it to. Very simple. It serves our nation poorly. And I know you all can probably come up with lots of examples in your own lives where when it is not clear who's in charge, then nobody's in charge, and when nobody's in charge, things do not get done properly. Next, what keeps me awake at night? Actually, very little. There's not a hot spot on this planet that bothers me as far as keeping me awake. You name whatever it is, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, Crimea, whatever. We as a nation have the capacity to do something about that. We may not get it right, we may make the wrong decisions, but we have the right capacity, the know-how, the systems to deal with those problems. That is true in every category except one. And the category that does keep me awake at night is that of cyber attack and cyber defense. Now, I had the responsibility when I was vice chairman and then as chairman to take to the president requests from your field commanders to use our cyber weapons against our enemies. Most of the time I recommended against using them. One, because we had some other way to have the impact we needed, and two, I always believed that first use of any weapon wasn't a good thing to do as a nation. But because I know exactly what our nation is capable of doing offensively, I also know that our nation cannot defend against what we can do offensively. And therefore, as a military man, I have to presume that our enemies can either do the same thing we can do, or are working on being able to do that, or have thought of something we haven't thought of yet. The advent of cyber weapons is having the same impact on the relations between nations that the advent of nuclear weapons had some 70 years ago. Nukes were used, and thank God, have not been used again in over 70 years. Cyber weapons are being used thousands of times a day. Again, I could spend 45 minutes on this, but for you in this room, not to worry about how the nation's going to defend itself, fundamentally, how do you deal with the real threats that are attacking your companies every day? You're sitting out there, you know that things are going on, you're not quite sure what. Almost everybody in this room is probably going to hire somebody to help defend your network. When I talk to CEOs, I say to them, call in your CIO and ask him or her, has your database ever been penetrated? And if your CIO says no, get a new CIO. Because you have been penetrated, whether it's a company or an individual, every single one of us has been hacked in at least one or more ways. What do you do about that? You can't boil the ocean. You can't protect everything forever. You can't even protect some small amount of things forever. So how do you triage that as a business person? First, why are you vulnerable? Do you have intellectual property that's useful to somebody else? Are you providing some kind of capacity that helps the strength of the nation militarily? Are you simply a financial target for somebody? Understand why it is that you are a target. Then, how much of what you believe is vulnerable do you really need to defend? Once you know why you're a target and how much you need to defend, then you can talk to the myriad of companies that are out there that want to sell you various security projects. There are hundreds, thousands of companies out there right now that will tell you They are the answer to your problems. Some of them are. Some of them aren't. You need to be an educated consumer before you go out. At the very minimum, especially on the dollar and cents side, set up your systems inside your companies in a way that is not vulnerable to single point of failure. One of the most prevalent scams out there right now is folks will hack into your system and they'll watch your email between the boss and the financial person. And they'll pick up on how you talk to each other and what words you use and tone. And then they'll send an email from you as the boss to your financial person that says, in words that you would normally use, hey, Susan, wire $50,000, wire $5 million to Johnny Jones Incorporated. I'll come by a little bit later this morning and sign the form. Use this email as the authorization. I will come by when I get in, sign the form. Susan sends the money out, and you walk in and say, I didn't send you that email. They are very good at being able to mimic you, and they know how much money you have. They'll ask you to send 50,000 if that seems like a reasonable number. They'll ask you to send 5 million if that seems like a reasonable number. Just understand that in the cyber world, at the national level, all of our major systems, our banking system, our stock market, oil flow, gas flow, water flow, you name it, all of that is dependent on computers, and therefore all of that is vulnerable. At the individual level and at the company level, we are vulnerable in the ways I've already talked about, and the question is, how do you then defend yourself, get yourself set up? Happy to answer more about that either in person when I'm done talking here this morning or during Q&A if you'd like to know more. But cyber is more and more prevalent, is becoming much more sophisticated. It is with us. And you at least want to defend yourself well enough so they go to somebody else down the road. Just make it painful for them to break into your system so they go to an easier target. It's like locking the door, your front door. If it's open, people will walk in. If it's closed, they might just go down to the next house. Okay. Now, this group, if I remember the numbers that flashed on the screen, about 70% of you, if I did my math right while I was up there for 2.5 seconds, are between the ages of 30 and 60. So what I'm about to talk to you about leadership-wise will not be news to you, but will in fact be a refresher. But there are things that I didn't think about while I was in active duty consciously, but I've thought about since I retired from military service, because it seemed to me like I had an incredibly wonderful experience in the U.S. military, and I tried to figure out how could that be? When I talk to young folks, I say, pick where you're going to work. You've got all that social media out there. You've got Google. Why wouldn't you do research on a company? Look at that company's product line. Look at that company's leadership. Would you like to be part of that product line? Would you like to associate yourself with that kind of leader? Because as a young person, you're not going to go in and change the organization. The organization is going to change you. The longer you're there, the more you look like the organization. Do your homework before you go into the organization. Is that something that you want to do, and do you want to end up, at the end of the day, being like the CEO of that company? If the answer is yes, by all means apply. If the answer is no, don't go there. But for us now on the senior end of that, have you Googled yourself recently? Have you looked at your company? What's out there? If you looked at your company or yourself online, would you want to work for you? If the answer is yes, terrific. If the answer is no, you need to start doing things differently so you can hire the right kinds of folks to help you with the complexity and the ambiguity and the volatility that is part of everyday life. Next, what I say to young folks is, okay, having picked where you're going to work, grow where you are planted. What do I mean? Each of us understands exactly who we want to be, and we all believe that we should be doing certain things. And we are disappointed when the organization we are in asks us to do something different than what we want to do. Every single rank along the way, I did not get to do something I wanted to do. And I could give you lots of examples, but I'll give you one where growing where I was planted made all the difference in the world, and I could literally do it every rank. But when I was a 1-star, I was the president of the Marine Corps University at Quantico, Virginia. I received a call from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, the #1 guy in the Marine Corps, that said, Pete, I've got great news for you. You've been selected for your 2nd star, and I've got even better news for you. I'm going to give you 1st Marine Division, Camp Pendleton, California. This is 16,000 Marines. If you happen to be an infantry officer in a Marine, you've died and gone to heaven. A, you're getting promoted, and B, you're getting a terrific job. About 3 weeks later, General Krulak, the Commandant, called me back and said, Pete, I know I told you I was going to give you the division, but I need to not do that. I want you to be promoted to 3 stars. For you to get nominated to be 3 stars, you must have served in a joint command as a 1-star or a 2-star. You haven't done that yet, so I'm not going to send you to the division. I'm going to send you to be the deputy commander of U.S. forces in Japan. We're on the phone together, and now I'm saying, this is ego satisfying because I'm wearing 1. He's talking about 3 stars. But I'm really disappointed because I'm not going to get the command I wanted. So I say to him on the phone, sir, if you're asking me, would I rather command 16,000 Marines and retire as a 2-star, or go off and be some Air Force general's deputy in Japan and maybe get 3 stars, I'd rather be the division commander. He said, I'm not asking you. So we laughed, and I said, aye, sir. If I don't get the 3rd star, will you give me the division on the way home? He said, I'll think about it. So I go off to Japan, and I serve this Air Force 3-star. I've got 2 stars, he's got 3. We're really a good team. He keeps his 3 stars and goes back to the Pentagon. I actually get promoted to 3 stars. I go back to the Pentagon. Now we're working together as buddies. He gets promoted to 4 stars, goes off. I get promoted to 4 stars, go off. Eventually, down the road, he's a vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His name is Dick Myers, U.S. Air Force. And Dick gets selected in 2001 to be the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And the president says to Dick Myers, who do you want to be your vice chairman? And he says, Pete Pace, which would never have happened had I not worked for Dick as a 2-star when he was a 3-star. Truth be told, if you gave me the exact same opportunity, I still prefer to have the division, okay? That's just because people are thick-headed like that, Marines are thick-headed. I would have preferred to have the division. But the fact that I went and did what I was told to do ended up giving me the opportunities that I had to be first vice chairman and then to be chairman. The message there, when I talk to young folks, is you never know what the organization needs. You just make sure they know what you want, and then go do what they tell you to do and they need you to do for the organization. For those of us in the room who are more senior then, the question is, do we take time to explain to people we're putting into slots to do things that we need them to do, why we're doing that? I wasn't happy about not getting into the division, but I understood exactly what General Krulak had in mind for me. When we assign folks to do things in our organizations, do we make sure that they know why we're doing this? Do we make sure that they know that, hey, Pete, I know you want to do this. I need you to do this. I will remember that you want to do that, and if we can do it, we will down the road. I'm a happy camper if my boss at least lets me know that they recognize that what they've asked me to do isn't exactly what I want to be doing. And the question to all of us is, how well do we do that with our subordinates? Then I tell young folks, make decisions, especially if you're a junior executive. Make decisions. That's why you're getting the big bucks. I learned this early on. As a lieutenant in Vietnam, I had a 40-man platoon. I was part of a rifle company that was about 180 Marines. We had been in combat for a while, but one day, my company went on a patrol outside the city of Hue City during Tet of '68 to see whether or not there were any NVAs still there. And my platoon was on point. We had the lead, and my responsibility was to take us along this route to determine whether or not there was any enemy out there. And we were on patrol. I'm 22 years old. My company commander, who's my boss, is a captain. He's 24 years old. And we're going down this trail for about a half hour, and I called him and said, basically, do you want me to go left or go right? He said, go left. And about an hour or so later, I called back and said, do you want me to go left or go right at this junction? He said, go right. The third time I called him for guidance, if you take out the curse words, he didn't say anything. But I got the message, which was, Lieutenant, you are out there, make decisions. That's why you're there. I promised myself if I ever got my butt chewed again, which I did, it was going to be for going too far, not for holding back. And the same thing is true in our organizations today. Have we encouraged our junior executives to make decisions? Have we told them kind of the left and right boundaries of where their decision space is? And do we allow them to make mistakes? When I got my master's degree, which I remember very little about, I remember one very specific thing that I read. There was a company, IBM, GE, makes no difference. There was a mid-level executive who made a $10 million mistake. Now, I'm reading about this in 1972. It happens in the 1960s, so add a zero to that. He made a $100 million mistake in today's money. But back then, it's 10 million bucks, and all the managers between the guy who made the mistake and the CEO saying, we should fire this guy, we should fire this guy. The CEO said something I have never forgotten, which was, why would I fire somebody I just spent $10 million to educate? And somebody says, yeah. A guy who makes mistakes kind of likes to hear that kind of philosophy. But it's true. Have we set up, do our subordinates know where their decision space is? Do we support them when they make mistakes? If it's moral turpitude or just laziness, but if they're making decisions and they're making mistakes and growing, are we supportive of them? Do they know that? And do we correct them in a way that allows them to grow? Making decisions. Next, it won't surprise you that I admire courage. Yes, courage on a battlefield, though I've seen incredible acts of valor, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of courage that it takes to be in a room full of people, small groups, maybe 5, 10, 15 people, whatever it is, where well-lit room, air-conditioned, and the decisions are being made and the discussion's going on, everybody's head is going like this. Somebody has the temerity to say, I see it differently, and here's why. As you know, as executives, the more senior you are, the more you need somebody in that room thinking and asking questions. As a general, I can convince myself how brilliant I am when I'm shaving in the morning. I need my subordinates to tell me my baby is ugly if my baby's ugly. And that's very, very hard for people to do. When somebody has the temerity to speak up, it really is incumbent on us as leaders to thank them for speaking up. They don't have to be right. They just need to know that you appreciate it. This works at small companies. It works at countries. Especially if you want your people to speak up, the vast majority of the responsibility for that resides in the senior person. Let me take you back to the White House. The first week of October 2001 is my first week as vice chairman. Dick Meyer is the chairman, is on travel. I'm the acting chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I go to my first National Security Council meeting as acting chairman. That's a small group of people, the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense, the CIA director, you name it. Not very powerful folks. So I'm sitting there, and the discussion is about something that has nothing to do with the military. But I'm sitting there thinking to myself, Joe Sixpack down at the 7-Eleven isn't going to get this. So I say to the president, Mr. President, this is a little bit out of my lane, and that's as far as I get. He says, Pete, as long as you're in this room, nothing is out of your lane. Aye, sir. Said what I had to say. 2 days later, being a Marine and a little bit of a slow learner, I go back to the White House. I'm now at my next National Security Council meeting. Again, the discussion is about something that has nothing to do with the military. I'm sitting there with this little feeling in my stomach that this just doesn't seem right. So trying to be, team player, not offensive, I say, Mr. President, this is a little bit out of my lane, but he says, Pete, didn't I tell you 2 days ago that as long as you're in this room, nothing is out of your lane? And I said, Mr. President, you did tell me that, and you will not have to tell me that again. And I said what I had to say. What did the senior person in the room do? He told all of us, very, very powerful folks in that room, all with unique responsibilities, that he needed everybody's brain engaged on every topic. Just because the Secretary of State was talking didn't mean that the Secretary of whatever couldn't ask that person questions. And oh, by the way, without directly telling me this, what he said to me was, you're wearing a military uniform, but I expect everybody else in this room in suits and dresses to be asking you questions until they're satisfied that they know the answers to their questions. The senior person in the room sets the tone. The question for all of us is, how well do we set that tone in our organizations? Do people know that you expect to be challenged? It's really difficult, especially for the younger folks, to challenge you. So what I recommend to them is, don't say to your boss, hey boss, I disagree. If it happens to be, the boss happens to be a guy, now you set up a little testosterone problem here where he has to beat you because you've challenged him. So the boss is going to win 9 times out of 8 because he has to. He has to. But if you approach it from the standpoint of, hey boss, if you hadn't said that, I was thinking this. Can you educate me on why that's not right? You haven't challenged them. You've paid respect to his or her experience and responsibilities. If you're right, they'll say, hey, Pete, you're right. If you're wrong, you're going to get the education you've asked for. Now, quite honestly, the more senior I got, the more I thought to myself, well, I know I'm right, but I'm still going to put this on the table this way. If you hadn't said that, Mr. President, I was thinking this. I've gotten my education just enough times to tell me, good thing I put it that way. But the bottom line is, for our subordinates, they need to be comfortable putting their ideas on the table. And our response to their questions will tell everybody else in the room whether or not they're expected to or not expected to challenge the status quo, so to speak. Next, I talked to them about setting a moral compass. This, for me, was brought home in spades when I was 22 years old in Vietnam. I had gone there knowing and hearing about atrocities on the battlefield, telling myself, no way I would ever let anybody in my charge do anything illegal or immoral in combat. Not going to happen. 30 July 1968, we're on patrol outside of Da Nang in some rice paddies, and a sniper shoots my machine gun squad leader square in the chest. Great young man, Lance Corporal Guido Farinero from Bethpage, New York. Great young guy. Guido died when I was there with him. I was infuriated. I called in an artillery strike on the village. Just blow that place away. My platoon sergeant, who's my senior enlisted man, who at the time was probably 19, maybe 20, again, I'm 22, didn't say anything to me. He just looked at me, and I knew by the way he was looking at me that I was doing it the wrong way, making a real mistake. Fortunately, it takes a while for the guns to figure out where you are, where the enemy is, to be able to fire, so there's time. There was enough time for me to cancel the artillery strike. And we did what we should have done, which was sweep through the village on foot, and go figure, all we found was women and children. I do not know how I could stand in front of you today, or even live with myself today, had I killed all those innocents. It startled me that I almost did something that immoral. When we got done with the patrol that day, I got my platoon together and I apologized to them, and I promised them that as best I could, I would never let that happen again. And literally every day, to include this morning, I think through my day and what might challenge me morally that day. 99.9% of the time, nothing I can think of actually happens. But just the thought process every day of reminding myself about my moral compass has helped me in the day-to-day business that we're all involved with. I will tell you, I have been challenged more year in and year out since I joined the business world, more than any time when I was on active duty. That doesn't mean that the active duty is a more moral place. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, there, at least for me, there's much more money and a lot more women on this side of the fence. Okay? Now, the women are in my head, but the money's real, okay? So what happens out here is, most people don't go to work every day saying, I think I'll do something illegal today. Yeah, criminals do, but no, people in this room, no. What happens to us is that all of a sudden a crisis hits, or timeline changes, or the competition is doing something we didn't expect, and now we are in crisis mode. And when we're in crisis mode, we start unintentionally cutting corners that get you into places that you would not normally let yourself go. What I learned back in 1968, and what is still true, is that I am going to be challenged morally when I am least prepared emotionally to deal with it. And therefore, having a sense of who I am each morning and who I want to be tomorrow morning helps me when the occasional challenge to morality comes down the line, to take the time to just think for 3 to 5 seconds. That's all it takes. If I do this, can I look myself in the mirror tomorrow? If the answer is yes, go do it. If the answer is no, find a different way. But each of us as leaders has an absolute responsibility, A, to act ethically and morally, and B, to tell our subordinates that that's how we expect them to act, and that you need them keeping not only themselves, but you on the straight and narrow, because we all recognize that when stuff starts happening, we're all going to start moving too fast. I've been embarrassed to have subordinates say to me, remember when you told us to tell you when we thought you were going off track? I think you're going off track. It's embarrassing to find out that, ooh, you're not quite as squared away as you thought you were. But if you thank somebody like that profusely, it helps everybody understand that you really do want an ethical, moral operation inside of all this chaos and confusion and ambiguity and money. Last 2 points, and we get to questions. One, somebody once said to me, if you have integrity, nothing else matters. And if you do not have integrity, nothing else matters. And that's really all you need to know about integrity. It's absolutely fundamental to who we are and all that we do. Last point. As leaders, it's our obligation, it's our privilege, it's actually a sacred responsibility to take care of those folks who look to us for leadership. How do you take care of the people in your charge? Well, over time, you build up a reputation as a caring leader. But a way is to just spend 5 minutes each day talking to one of your subordinates about themselves. Not about work, just who are they? What's their family like? Where did they come from? What are their aspirations? What do they want? Just who are they? Where are they? Where are they going? How's their life? On occasion, they'll bring up something that you can actually do something about if it's a problem. Most of the time, you can only commiserate. But you start working with your people in a way where they understand that they're not just cogs in a wheel. They are real human beings to you, the boss. And then over time, as you have already done, how you act, how you take care of them says much more than what you say to them. But if you're making sure that they're properly compensated, you're making sure that the things that you control that impact their lives, if you're doing that in a way that reflects your concern for them as individuals, they'll know they're in a caring organization. Every single one of us in this room wants to work for a boss who cares about you. We all want to work for a caring boss. If the boss is a caring individual, some amazing things happen. In a caring organization, when the boss says, this is what I want done, and people go out and start to execute whatever that project is, in any walk of life, any endeavor, as soon as you start executing whatever the project is, there's friction. Things start going wrong. In a caring organization, those folks below you who know your intent will take your guidance and they will take personal, professional risk. They will change your guidance, do it in a way that accomplishes your intent. In an organization that believes that Pete's all about his next promotion or all about money, don't care about anybody below me, guess what happens? They will do exactly what the boss tells them to do. And because none of us is smart enough to see all the things that might go wrong, the project will get off track at a minimum and maybe fail. Their butts are covered because they did exactly what you told them to do. Now, the reason to take care of your people is because it's the right thing to do. But the result is, especially in a world of complexity and ambiguity and volatility, where none of us is smart enough to be able to handle and think through all the things that might go wrong, in that environment, building a team, the way we've talked about this morning, and having that team know that you're a caring leader will result in execution of projects in your organization performing at a level beyond which any of us has any right to believe that we can actually lead other human beings to accomplish. It is not always easy to be a leader, but it is always rewarding when you do it with the intent to get the job done while taking care of your folks. With that, we've got about 15 minutes left. I'd be delighted to answer your questions. Nothing's out of bounds. You can ask about anything you want. If I know the answer, I will tell you. If I don't, I will make something up. By the time you figure out I made it up, I'll be gone. It'll be okay. So I won't be able to see. I understand the people with microphones, and I think whoever's got the first question, over here? Okay, I was going to say, because if we have a hard time with the first question, let's just skip that and go to the second one.
General, can you hear me? Okay. General Pace, Pete Gephardt with the Infinity Group. I'd actually have two questions, but I will, due to the time, I restricted to one. You were talking about the $10 million mistake or the $10 million learning curve. And I think that boss had to make a decision. Am I looking at this as a mistake and fire the individual, or is it a learning curve for me and my company? And the baseline on this is taking the risk. And as you know, big decisions really out in the military, your decisions affects life and death. If you're a businessman, it affects money. On risk management, and most of us here are familiar with this, could you give us a little bit more your take on what would be the best way to handle this? Because we take risks every day, but some people handle it better than others. And I would appreciate that, General.
Let me make sure. First of all, thank you. I think that is what, the 45th year out of 47 that you've had a chance to answer the first question? I love it. I say that as a compliment, because I was told that out of respect for who you are and what you do, that you always have the privilege of asking the first question.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Now, make sure I got it right. How do I, as a senior leader, deal with risk? Is that correct, sir? Okay. I don't have a clue. No. I guess because the business that I grew up in was inherently risky, that I am personally comfortable in the environment that's on the screen here, which is complexity, ambiguity, and volatility. Each of those, and the incredible video that started this off, and all the other words that were on that screen when we were going through the maze, all of those things include a significant measure of risk. And I think as a senior leader, understanding that you are not smart enough, I am not smart enough to foresee all that, the best thing I can do is hire a smart team, a capable team, tell them what I want and how I want it and by when I want it, get out of their way and let them do it, and be available to help pick up the pieces. If I have 10 subordinates and each of the 10 is working on 10 projects, now I've got 100 things going on, and if each of them gets 10% wrong, now I've got 90 things going well and 10 things that I need to apply my time to. The alternative to that is maybe I can do 10 things myself that everybody else subordinate to me is waiting for me to do. And if I'm lucky, I'm only going to make 10% of the mistakes, so maybe the company's going to get 9 things done instead of 90. So part of risk is getting comfortable with yourself and your own pain level, so to speak, and understanding that the people working for you are human beings, they're going to make mistakes, and being comfortable and reminding yourself that I should be happy to be working on these 10 problems because 90 things are happening that I wasn't smart enough to think of myself that they thought of for me. Now, this isn't to be blinders, because some folks do need to be fired. But I always err on the side of giving somebody a second chance. And if they take the second chance, great. And if they don't, public execution is not a bad thing. But risk as a leader really means giving up some of the control. It became most obvious to me between, and I'll just use my own personal weaknesses. Up until the time I was a 2-star and through the time I was a 2-star, I had complete knowledge of everything for which I was responsible at that time. When I got to be a 3-star, my span of control got so big it was not possible for me to know as much about each of the things I was responsible for as I always had for the previous 30 plus years. It was really difficult for me to finally understand that the risk at that level was me trying to keep control of it all, as opposed to being the orchestra leader and just helping where I was needed. Setting out 4 or 5 major things I wanted to get accomplished, focusing on those 4 or 5 things, and letting the organization take care of the rest. So I don't know that if I answered your question the way you asked it, but the more senior you are, the more risk there is to the success of your company, but also the more need there is to one, hire the right people, and then 2, empower them to do the job that you yourself cannot possibly do. Did that answer, sir? Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, General Pace. Question about cybersecurity, cyber attack. I don't see a lot in the newspaper about the source of the attacks. We see attacks happen on corporations and entities, but I don't see much on the source. Are there foreign government sponsored or executed cyber attacks against this country? And the next question is, we don't see a lot of the diplomatic things going on in the background, but does the United States take those attacks as serious as we would take physical attacks?
Thank you. There absolutely are, every single day, thousands of times a day, government orchestrated attacks on our systems. Almost every country out there now, because of the capacity of computers, it used to be, and still is for the most part, that only nation states have the capacity to do the kinds of attacks that turn off the electricity in San Antonio for a month. So the United States, Great Britain, Russia, China, countries that have spent billions of dollars on computer systems can attack each other in that way, but don't, because we don't turn off the lights in Moscow because we don't want the lights turned out in Washington, D.C. So you still have, with cyber weapons, the same kind of mutually assured destruction that you have in nuclear weapons. The problem is below that. So you got nation states, then you got state-sponsored folks, then you got terrorists, then you got criminals, then you got hacktivists, then you got hackers. And each of them has a different level of capacity, and each of them has a different target set in mind. But as computers continue to get more and more powerful, the folks at the bottom end, the hackers, are getting closer to the capacity of the folks at the top. And the real threat in my mind is not the nation states who are attacking us daily, but the terrorists who want to attack us in a way where they do turn off the electricity, they do make it impossible to do transactions in the stock market, et cetera. And They have no homeland that we can hold at risk. That's why I spend a lot of my time when I work with the government these days, trying to help think through what it is that we can do about that, what it is that we want to do about that, and then go out into the business world, and I'm with several cyber companies in the business world, trying to provide the solutions that I know our government needs, okay? But you asked specifically North Korea. Very much an attack on Sony, because, I mean, that makes sense to us, but it made sense to them. They didn't like the fact that, you know, it made fun of their dear leader, who's a complete idiot. And it made him look like an idiot. So it actually was kind of factual. But it made them cranky. So they literally almost destroyed Sony because they went after their intellectual property and their financial systems. The question then becomes, and our government now is working with this, when does an attack on a company like that become an attack on a nation? Had North Korea sent a missile into Sony headquarters, we would have responded militarily to that attack. They sent bits and bytes. They sent digits. They hit an enter key. I'm not saying the proper response is military. I'm saying that that is a forerunner of what is going to be more and more prevalent. And we as a nation have to decide, how do we want to respond to that? What is our intent? We certainly have the capacity against nations to express our concern in a way that they will get their attention. We can do that. So at least for the next several years, making the right policy decision will be executable based on what policy you decide to implement. If you would decide that any nation that attacks any company is going to get whacked by us, we could do that. But you have to make that decision. More disconcerting is the 5 to 10 years from now when terrorists, hackers, and the like have capacity, and it's really, really difficult to track back and attribute an attack to a specific computer someplace. Okay? I do believe, though, that we are going to have a response system that allows us to make it economically or whatever way more disadvantageous for the attacker than for us. As long as in any realm, whether it's bombs or digits, as long as the attacker feels like there's more to gain than lose in the attack, they're gonna do it. And right now in cyber, there's much more to be gained than to be lost as the attacker. Did that answer your question? Sir.
All right, I think maybe we have time for one more question,
Okay.
General Pace.
Is there one back there?
Good.
I'm guessing you're going to stand in front of the microphone. So, I mean, the speaker, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
Good morning. Good morning, General. Thank you. My question was related to when you talked about the president being a good director by virtue of his position, but not necessarily a good manager of the project or the initiative going on. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in making that transition from a manager up to a more director level? So from seeing individual squads to overseeing all the squads, for example.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks for stating it that way. If that's the message you received from what I said, shame on me, because that's not what I meant to show. This system, this National Security Council system, is not about Democrats, it's not about Republicans. It was this way when I served as a 3-star with President Clinton, and then as a 4-star with President Clinton. It's this way when I served as a 4-star with President Bush. It has nothing to do with the president. What it has to do with is available leadership time. All the way up until the decision point, the president is still doing all that he's doing, and everybody else is doing all this work. And that everybody else doing all that work brings to the president solutions to his problem. He wasn't part of that solution process, but he makes a decision, and that piece works well. But he's a busy man, so he makes his decision, and now he moves on to the next problem of the day. And all the folks who helped put the decision process together for him now have the responsibility to execute. And because he's the president, and because he's the only guy with the authority to make decisions and direct his secretaries of whatever to do things, and because he's busy and isn't day-to-day supervising this one project, even though it may be a big project, it's not the president, it's the system that doesn't function properly. The solution to that is not to tell the president, you've got to pay more attention. The solution to that, in my opinion, is to have the president say, when he says, this is what I want done, he also says, this is what I want done, and state you're responsible for making it happen. Treasury, you've got this one. DOD, you've got that one. And then those secretaries are the ones who are responsible and have the authority to direct traffic and make decisions. But because that's not in our system right now, the president, being a busy man, doesn't see the turmoil, doesn't know about it. And because the people below him, just like some of the people below you guys, are understandably proud of who they are and protective of their positions, and they're not about to go tell the president of the United States that they got a problem. So that's why it is what it is. It's not that any president is good in one direction and bad in the other. That's not what I meant. The system that supports the president is good in one direction and not good in the other. Okay? And I'm sorry, if the mic is still near you, could you give me again what you want me to talk about as far as span of control?
Yeah, very good. The main question that I was trying to get to was kind of taking the step, but from being a manager to being a director, and any advice that you'd have in regards to that.
Yeah, I talked about it just a little bit when I talked about 2-star to 3-star for me personally. We all have our own capacities, but understanding how much you can control. So in the military, everything's built in threes. A fire team leader is one Marine with 3 people under him. A squad leader is one Marine with 12 people under him in 3 groups of 4. A platoon leader is one man with 3 squads under him, etc. So a company commander's got 3 platoons, a battalion commander's got 3 companies. Why? Because that span of control, in combat especially, is about all you can physically, mentally handle. So you're not trying to figure out, as a company commander with 150 to 180 people under your command, you're not trying to figure out how to tell PSC Pace how to fire his rifle. What you're trying to figure out as a company commander is how to give orders and guidance to your 3 platoon leaders. Business. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10. Each person's capacity as a leader is different. But there is a finite amount of individuals reporting to you that any CEO, president, leader can truly manage. So when you're setting up and as you're growing, you need to bring people into the leadership positions. Startup companies, the founder, maybe a couple of founders, one guy is a CEO, another guy is a COO, they're working together. The company grows, and now they need some expertise they didn't have, and then now they need some more leadership, and they bring on board somebody else. The trick as a senior person is to understand and admit and embrace your own limits. And as I said, when I was a 2-star, I was still working 3 or 4 people below me, but I knew everything that was going on. At least I thought I did. When I got to 3 stars, I still only had 3 to 5 people below me, but their responsibilities are such, I just couldn't know it all. And there's just a transition there of knowing for yourself in your company when you need more leadership capacity than your current team, including yourself, can handle. So you hire another leader and set up your structure in a way that your responsibilities are set up in a way that you can handle. If you can handle 10 people reporting directly to you, great. But if all you know you can handle is 5, then you need to organize your company so that you only have 5 direct reports, because that's all you can handle. But that's very much a personal understanding of yourself. The military, after eons of doing what they do, has come up with a system that works for most people most of the time. So it's very structured. The Army, the Marine Corps, other countries' militaries, all very much on the same structure after thousands of years of warfare. Companies totally different. So it's hard to just transpose what I learned in one place to another place. But fundamentally, knowing yourself, understanding your limits, and setting up your organization to accommodate for your strengths and your weaknesses is how I believe you go about doing it in business. Did that answer your question? I'll take silence as a yes, thanks. It's time for me to stop. Let me once again say to each of you, first, it's an honor to be here with you all, and I mean that sincerely. I love being in the corporate world now and getting a chance to talk to great Americans who do such great work, and especially here in the capital projects that you all own, contract for, build. All that you do is so impactful on so many people, your employees, and especially the fellow citizens. So thanks for letting me be part of your family this morning.